joined the firm, and I still remember where I was when I saw the blog you decided to write, and asked me if you thought I was okay.
It's a dream team.
It's
a supreme team.
That's
and
right.
all our eyes green. Only. Sorry.
I can't even tell you how I was in my apartment here in the Castor, and I just flipped out. I was tears in my eyes, and I was so fucking stoked that you started with a quote, and it was a great quote. Dream team meeting the supreme team. So for me, I just felt ecstatic that we get to have music. What do you know? In our life and part of business. It's just revolutionary somehow. Switch your music off when you're at work. What? So you love rap. What's the deal with that?
What kind of question is that?
I know. I was like paid $100,000 to ask that question.
Yeah, so, you know, it's, when I was a kid, I mean, that was the music that got started. It was like kind of being a kid when rock and roll came out, being a kid, you know, when I was a kid, it was when hip hop was sort of born. It was, you know, the era of it, you know, starting with like, I think the Sugar Hill Gang came out when I was in junior high school, and then Run DMC when I was in high school, and then I got to college and it was Eric B. and Rakim, so this was like the golden era of rap music. So it was just always the thing that I listened to, and then the interesting thing that happened for me is when I went into business, and I never would have thought this would be true, you know, the inspiration for, like, the soundtrack to my life was hip hop anyway, but it was crazy how applicable hip hop was to business, and how, and in particular that because of the way the music started, where for the first 10 years of the genre, like, nobody was signed to a major label. I think Hammer who's right there, was the first platinum selling artist in hip hop, but that was a good 10 years after it got started. And so everybody started out, including Hammer, like making their own stuff, selling their CDs out of the back of their car. And in other words, they were all entrepreneurs. And that entrepreneurial kind of origin ended up being like a huge part of the music. And so, you know, when you get into trying to explain a business lesson to a CEO, it becomes just so relevant. Like, for you know, a good example. And then when you teach, as you know, there's the intellectual lesson. Like, do I understand the mechanics of how this works? And that's all fine, but in management, so much of it is, it's emotional, right? Like, it's not that, like, you're setting up an organization in this fashion with these lines. It's like you're dealing with this person who's going to have less territory than that person, even though they work their asses off, and how do you explain that? And so it's very emotional. And so I find in my writing, like, it's easy to write the logical, but how do I deliver the emotional message? And so a good example of this, I wrote a post called, which Amy mentioned earlier, which is, you know, how to control, or how to kind of manage politics in your company. Because nobody ever, like, nobody who runs a company thinks they're political, but a lot of companies are very political in nature. And so it goes through all the things that happen. Like, if somebody says, you know, to you, hey, I deserve a raise, and you go, well, I think you're right, then all of a sudden, like, you don't know it, but it's like, well, was that person the most deserving person to get that raise? Right. And then the fact that you gave it to them because they asked, okay, now you're rewarding something that's other than work, and you're creating politics. And so I went through all the logical steps of that, but I really didn't feel like it was going to connect to people emotionally. So I added a hip-hop lyric from one of my favorite rappers, Rick Ross, which said, who the fuck do you think you're fucking with? I'm the fucking boss. And I was like, well, that's gave clarity.
I love it.
To the whole thing.